They were soldiers of the emperor, men trained to fight to the final end, not to surrender. What happened next would change how they saw their enemies and themselves. Watch until the end to find out how one meal transformed the hearts of men who once swore to fall for their emperor. In their world, capture was the ultimate shame, a stain that erased your honor, your name, even your family's memory of you. But in 1944, thousands of Japanese troops found themselves trapped in a war that was already lost. Hungry, wounded, and far from home, they faced a choice: succumb for nothing or live with disgrace. When they laid down their rifles, they didn't just surrender to an enemy. They surrendered every belief they'd ever been taught. And what awaited them wasn't the afterlife, but something they could never have imagined. Weeks later, after long voyages across the Pacific, they arrived in a strange new world, the United States of America. Here, behind the fences of rural camps in Texas, Arkansas, and Arizona, they waited, uncertain if this was just a new kind of battlefield. The Japanese soldiers had been told that the Americans were savages, cannibals, that prisoners would be mistreated, starved, or being dealt with for sport. So when the camp cooks arrived carrying trays of warm food, rice, meat, vegetables, and bread, many thought it was a cruel trick. But it wasn't. It was lunch. Then came the day that would burn itself into their memories. The guards rolled in barrels of something called Coca-Cola. Ice cold, sweet, fizzy, the color of dark amber. And on their plates, soft, round bread wrapped around hot beef and sauce. For the first time, Japanese prisoners of war were served an American hamburger and Coke. Some prisoners stared in silence. Others hesitated to touch it, unsure if it was edible, unsure if it was real. But then, one man took a bite, then another, and something happened. Laughter, relief, confusion. Some said it was the first time they'd tasted kindness in years. It wasn't just a meal, it was a message. For men who had been told that Americans were monsters, the taste of a hamburger and Coca-Cola shattered everything they thought they knew. And for many of them, that single moment began to change how they saw the world and themselves. For the Japanese soldiers, surrender was never meant to happen. From the first day of training, they were taught that being ended was nobler than capture. That to be taken alive was to betray the emperor himself. They were the children of a war machine that glorified sacrifice. Soldiers were given one-way orders: fight until your body was broken, and then succumb standing. But as the Pacific Campaign turned against Japan, the myth began to crumble. At Guadalcanal, Saipan, and Iwo Jima, American firepower was unstoppable. Entire divisions vanished. Outnumbered and outgunned, the surviving Japanese soldiers faced an unthinkable choice. Some chose to unalive themselves. Others, wounded, delirious, starving, laid down their rifles and raised their hands to the sky. For many of them, that first sip of American water was their first act of surrender. They expected to be beaten, maybe ended on the spot. But instead, the Americans treated them. They were fed, cleaned, and loaded onto trucks. They didn't understand why. Soon ships carried them east, farther than they'd ever traveled. Across the vast Pacific, past Hawaii, past San Francisco, into a land that most of them had only seen on propaganda maps. They thought they were being taken to factories, or mines, or execution grounds. But as they stepped off the ships and onto American soil, what they found was civilization. Through train windows, they saw clean towns, white houses, children running through fields. To men raised to believe that America was a land of beasts, this was incomprehensible. "Where are the monsters?" one prisoner reportedly whispered. "Where are the barbarians?" The camps were not perfect, but they were orderly, clean, and far more humane than what any prisoner expected. Some were placed in Texas, others in the deserts of Arizona or the pine forests of Arkansas. The Americans followed the Geneva Convention strictly, not out of mercy, but out of principle. They were given shelter, work, 3 meals a day, medical care, and perhaps most shocking of all, respect. For men who had lived through years of jungle hell, this strange kindness felt almost like a trick. They didn't know it yet. But inside these fences, the real transformation was about to begin, because soon they would encounter something that would challenge everything they believed about the enemy, not through violence or speeches, but through taste. For weeks, the Japanese prisoners lived with quiet disbelief. Every morning, they woke to the same routine: inspection, breakfast, work, lunch, rest. It was structured, almost military, but humane. They had expected cruelty. Instead, they found predictability, fairness, even boredom. The food was simple: beans, rice, sometimes bread and vegetables. Occasionally, they were even given small portions of meat. Many whispered among themselves, "Are they fattening us up, preparing us for something?" It was hard to accept that kindness could come without a hidden purpose. Then, one Sunday afternoon, the camp mess hall prepared a new dish, something that would become the most talked about meal of their lives. An American guard called it a hamburger. Most had never seen or smelled anything like it. The scent of sizzling beef and warm bread filled the camp air. One prisoner later recalled the smell as so powerful it made us dizzy. They didn't understand what it was: meat inside bread. To them, it looked strange, almost like a child's food. When the guards handed them the food, the men froze. Some thought it was a test, but the guards smiled, motioned for them to eat. A few took cautious bites, and then silence turned to murmurs, murmurs to laughter, and laughter to tears. It was warm, flavorful, comforting. For men who had eaten little more than rice and dried fish for years, the soft bread and juicy meat felt almost otherworldly. Beside each burger sat another mystery: a cold glass bottle labeled Coca-Cola. They unscrewed the caps, took a sip, and froze. Sweetness, coldness, bubbles bursting on the tongue, a flavor they had never experienced in their entire lives. One prisoner later said, "It was as if I had tasted the future." Others couldn't stop drinking, laughing like children. For that brief moment, the war, the shame, the fear, all of it disappeared. It wasn't just food, it was contact, a human exchange through taste and texture. And for these men, it became a symbol, proof that their enemy was not the demon they had been told about, but something far more dangerous: human. In the weeks that followed, the hamburger and the Coca-Cola became more than just food inside the camps. They became symbols of a different kind of power. A power not born from weapons or flags, but from abundance, comfort, and simplicity. Many of the prisoners had never eaten beef this way: ground, seasoned, pressed into a patty. In Japan, meat was a rarity, often reserved for the elite. But here, the enemy ate it daily. Between soft bread topped with mustard or onions, washed down with a sweet drink that fizzed and sparkled. They began to realize something their military had never prepared them for: that America's strength wasn't just its weapons, it was its lifestyle, its confidence, its ability to feed not only its soldiers, but even its enemies. Inside the camps, life settled into rhythm. The men worked the fields, played baseball with the guards, built furniture, even formed orchestras. But it was the food that stayed with them most, because every time they bit into a hamburger or took a sip of Coke, they were tasting something that felt impossibly distant: peace. When the war ended and the prisoners finally returned to Japan, many carried those memories home. Some spoke of the kindness they received, the strange warmth of American food, the unexpected humanity of their captors. And soon, across a country struggling to rebuild from ashes, small cafes began selling a new dish: the hamburger. Alongside it came Coca-Cola, bottled in Japan, advertised as a drink of friendship, of modern life, of freedom. In a few short years, what had once been the taste of an enemy became the flavor of aspiration. The Japanese prisoners of war who once trembled before a hamburger now lived in a nation where it was a symbol of comfort. And though most never spoke publicly about their time in captivity, their silence carried a quiet truth: that sometimes peace begins not with treaties or speeches, but with simple acts of humanity. In the middle of the bloodiest war in human history, two simple things, bread and beef, sugar and fizz, reminded men on both sides that beneath the uniforms, they were still human. And that taste, that first bite, that first sip, would echo far beyond the fences of a Texas prison camp.